afternoon, everybody. My name is Tasneem Amina. I am a second year, and I'm also one of the student coordinators for the law panel. And just so you guys know where you are. And I just wanted to also introduce Thomas.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas Alva. I'm a fourth year in the college, and I want to welcome you guys. I hope you guys are having a great time so far, and you have a great panel, so enjoy.
Just before we go quick, I just wanted to say a big thank you and a huge round of applause to our advisor, Debbie Chisor. She's also the director of the Chicago Careers in Law program, and we had to go to her for everything. So I don't know how much of a help we were as much as how much she accomplished all of this, and she's truly responsible for putting all of this together. So a huge round of applause for her.
Good afternoon. I'm glad you could come today. If you have any trouble hearing, raise your hand. Otherwise, this is the order of battle. I will ask each of the panelists to introduce himself or herself, and then after the introductions have been made, in sequence, each panelist will take about 5 minutes to answer the question, where did I think I was going to be when I was in law school, and how did I get to where I am now? All right? And after the 5-minute presentations, with whatever byplay follows that, the floor will be open to you. This is your chance to talk to folks who are at various stages of their careers in the legal profession and in various segments of the legal profession. We have 2 lawyers today who work for the government at one level or another, in one sector or another. We have someone who works in public interest. We have someone who's in private practice, and we have one aging academic. So with that being said, let me start to my left. Mr. Castaneda.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My name is John Castaneda. I'm an assistant state's attorney at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I've been there for about 10 years. Actually, this March it'll be exactly 10 years. And contrary to the majority of the assistant state's attorneys in our office, I do not do criminal prosecutions, but I am lucky to be assigned to the Child Protection Division, where we do civil prosecution. We try to have the children brought before the court to be deemed wards of the court because, unfortunately, they've been abused, neglected, or left dependent. I also have the unenviable task of presenting evidence to terminate parental rights in those cases where, unfortunately, the parents just haven't made progress. I'm very happy with what I do, and I mentioned to my boss recently, I said, I love my wife, but I really, really, really like this job. So.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rocio Alcantar. I'm a staff attorney at the National Immigrant Justice Center, a subsidiary of Heartland Alliance. I've been there for almost a year. Next week I'll be there a year, so pretty recent. I graduated from law school in 2010. My job, I work mainly with victims of human trafficking in immigration law, so helping people who are who have been brought to the country and forced into various ugly things, whether it's labor, forced into labor, military servitude, or forced into some sort of sexual exploitation situation. I also represent clients in immigration court, so I do a bit of administrative law and litigation in the immigration court. I'm really happy doing what I do and learning. I'm, like I said, a very new attorney, and so far so good. I really like my job, and it's a learning experience.
Hey folks, my name is Jim Marks. I'm a member and a founder of a law firm called Bizogany, Marks & Mueller. I've been a practicing attorney for about 27 years, and the entirety of that time I've been in private practice doing what's called business litigation, meaning I do trial work, but my clients are mostly businesses or individuals suing businesses or vice versa, and that involves everything from cases involving breach of contract to commercial fraud cases to trademark infringement cases, the whole gamut. And I think that's one of the reasons that I like my particular practice is that I am, although I do currently a lot of healthcare-related litigation, I've tried just about everything except criminal cases, probate cases, and divorce work. So my practice is varied. It's, to me, very interesting, and frankly, the longer I'm a lawyer, believe it or not, the more I enjoy it. I enjoy the clients. I enjoy the trial work. I find going into court and arguing in front of a judge or doing a jury trial is a thrill. It's a lot of work, but it's an absolute thrill. And that's just my take on my practice and why I like being a lawyer. So I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Anna?
My name's Anna Shalene, and I just graduated from Stanford Law in June. I started my new job. I work for the U.S. Department of Labor. I work for an administrative law judge, so it's a special court that only deals with federal employment law. I do a lot of cases with contractors from Iraq and Afghanistan who got injured over there and now try and get them benefits. And fascinating job, I love it. I was also the president of the National Association of Law Students with Disabilities. So if anyone has any interest about that, I can love to connect you to a lot of resources for that. So.
I'm Dennis Hutchinson. As you've been told, I teach constitutional law and legal history at the university in both the college and law school. I chair the program Law, Letters, and Society, edit the Supreme Court Review with Jeff Stone and David Strauss. I chair the faculty clerkship committee at the law school, so I'm involved in various aspects of the profession. I love what I do. I considered working for the government. I served as a law clerk for 3 years, 3 different judges. That was enough of the government for me. I enjoy very much what I'm doing. I'd like to ask each of the panelists before we throw the floor open to questions, and that is, when you were considering going to law school, how did you frame the issue for yourself? I want to be a lawyer, so I want to go to law school, or I'm not sure what I want to be, but if you have a law degree, you can do almost anything, or everybody else is taking the LSAT, I'd better do it too. How did you make the decision? We have people who made the decision 30 years ago. People made the decision only a few years ago. Start with you, Anna.
When I was an undergrad, I had no idea I wanted to be a lawyer, go into law. I actually saw Professor Hutchins last on the Marshall Committee when I was applying for a fellowship to do an MFA in England. I'm a visual arts major, and that's really my interest. However, then right before my final interview for that, I got hit by a car, assaulted by the driver, and then illegally detained by the police for 2 hours. That will get you interested in law pretty quickly. I'd also, through the process, found out that the closer I got to convincing them that art was what I should do with my life, the less I thought that was a good idea. And I decided, look, I really need to look into some other options. And I had taken a class my 4th year of the school that did some legal issues. I decided, this is kind of interesting. I wanted to check it out first. This is something I'd really recommend, is going and working in some sort of legal capacity. Get to know whether you like working as a lawyer, because it's very different than law school. I went and worked for a sole practitioner for a while, loved the work. I got to do all kinds of great fact investigation and applied to law school, and away I went. Loved it.
Great. Jim?
Actually, I had a pretty good idea when I started law that I wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, and a practicing lawyer. I took 2 years off after college and had the great fortune of getting a job with the Department of Treasury as a labor management relations specialist in 1979, which was at a time when the federal government, had just recently reorganized the bureaucracy and created a structure in the public sector for labor relations that mirrored the private sector, where you have the National Labor Relations Board. And so at the age of 24, I'm in a room with senior management at a federal data center telling people that were 30 years older than me how they should be negotiating with the union, how they should be handling employee management relations, et cetera. And the other thing that I noticed, though, was that the people that were really having the most fun were the lawyers that were handling the unfair labor practice hearings and going to court. And I had an opportunity to go with them. So when I went to law school, I had a very fixed idea that what I really wanted to be was a labor management relations lawyer. I saw this vision of myself, either being with the National Labor Relations Board or in a private law firm doing labor relations work. So that's why I went to law school. Now, it turns out, during the course of my going to law school and shortly afterwards, the firm I was with really didn't need another person in labor management relations, and that's how I got into commercial litigation. But I actually, like I said, when I went to law school, I had a pretty clear idea that I wanted to be a practicing lawyer and something that was in an adversarial situation, not necessarily in private sector, but either in the private sector or in the public sector doing that.
Okay. Next.
For me, I think the pivotal moment, I guess, came. I actually was involved with the Human Rights Program when I was in college, and I did an internship the summer before my fourth year. And I think it was my internship involved helping refugees that were coming from Africa into the European Union, into Spain. And so I think it was working there that I realized how much an attorney is needed for individuals that are have faced persecution or are just immigrants in general who are suddenly, for whatever reason, in another country and now need help. So given that experience and given my own personal experience, I was born abroad, I was born in Mexico, came to this country as a young child, and just that background and that experience really pushed me to thinking that maybe law was what I wanted to do, that I wanted to help people like me, people who have struggled. And so that kind of was what made up my mind to try law school. When Professor Hutchinson asked us, what did you think you were going to be doing when you were in law school? So I went to law school straight after my undergraduate career at the University of Chicago. I think at some point during law school I was completely lost. I didn't know exactly where I was going to end up. I just knew I had to finish law school and then I would figure it out. I always knew that I wanted to do public interest law, whether that was practicing law or in some sort of nonprofit managing. So I just kept at it, and I figured things would fall into place somehow. I did a lot of internships when I was in law school, just trying to get my feet wet in different areas of the law, just to try to understand myself and what kind of strengths I could offer in different areas. So I did. I worked in bankruptcy law for people who suffer from HIV and AIDS at the Legal Assistance Foundation, so I helped represent them in bankruptcy proceedings. I did a bit of consulting work for a small firm that worked in getting government grants to do urban development. So I did a couple of things like that, and eventually, my passion was always kind of immigration law and human rights law. So there was an opening, luckily, and I applied and landed the staff attorney position that I'm at right now. So that's kind of my
Terrific.
background.
And finally, John.
Thank you. Back in 1983, when I was an undergrad, I wanted to be a physicist. There was a pivotal moment in 1983 where I looked at the problem set for that week and I said, I don't think this is going to happen. Ultimately, it came down to this. When you're a senior, you needed to get a job. I had a network of friends who, some were in business school, some were bound right to go to law school right away. But the consensus was, something practical. So what I did was I took an accounting course at the B school, which I found invaluable once I later became a solo practitioner because I did my own books. But really, I became a paralegal. And the reason I became a paralegal, I was mildly interested in the idea of maybe someday becoming a lawyer with a law degree because, and this is the key, I sensed that I was more of a people person and less of a things, and I'm kind of an idea person, but really more of a people person. So I figured it would be better for me to fit in law school than if I were to go full steam with the physicist route. So I became a paralegal, and I was a paralegal for 3 years. And it was during that time, working closely with the lawyers, that I realized, I've been a paralegal, I think I can be a legal. So I went ahead and I took the LSAT and I went to law school, and after that, the opportunities just kind of presented themselves. So I felt like I was kind of on a conveyor belt even then, looking around, seeing where I could get a job, and then you fall into a situation where you find yourself surrounded by people that you identify with, and that's where I landed with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office after having been a solo practitioner for about 10 years. So that's my route.
Terrific. The floor is open for questions. I think if you speak up, you needn't have to trudge your way to the microphone. And if it's too soft and I hear it, I will repeat it. But ask anything you want, starting with you.
Okay, so my question is for Ms.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Alcantar, but yes.
So I'm kind of very interested in a lot of the things that you just said that you're interested in. But I guess one of my major hesitations about doing public interest and working in the nonprofit law is being financially sustainable.
Very, very good point.
I know that my parents will not be paying for my education or to pursue. And so I was wondering what your experience is, or even those of your peers that are interested in the kind of law that you are in, how they have coped. And I mean, obviously you're lucky to find a job, I guess, relatively soon after graduation. But has there been an experience that other people interested in this law as you were able to come across quickly, or has funding been an issue? Like, be really real.
Okay, absolutely. That's a very, very good question. So the reality is that as a public interest lawyer, whether it's working for a nonprofit or even some government jobs, the pay is bad, and that's the reality. I mean, you're not going to get the six figures that you're going to get at a private firm. It's just not. It's not there, and even less so now. So expect, I guess, a range of maybe 40s, 50,000, which, a lot of, probably going out of college, you can probably land a job making that much money and without the need to go to law school. So that's the reality about money. As far as managing, so I decided to go to law school and take on this huge debt. My background, I don't have a big stash of money somewhere or anything. So I took on debt. I chose the law school. I went to DePaul. I strategically chose DePaul because it gave me the most money. So that I think was a good choice, and I would recommend that for those of you that decide to go this route. And then I also chose the law school I chose because it had in my opinion, the best public interest program that I wanted to do. So it kind of had the field of law that I wanted to go into. So that helped. And then while in law school, taking on all that debt, I just kept, working internships, so making at least a little bit of money to support yourself and paying for books or whatever. And then the good thing, I guess, is that after law school and now as I am repaying that huge debt, there are good laws out there that help public interest lawyers pay that debt off. Law schools have a lot of programs that help public interest lawyers pay their debt. There's a lot of scholarships out there. It's competitive, as everything is, but there are scholarships out there that help pay down the debt. And then the federal government, if you have federal student loans, there is a public interest loan forgiveness program that after making payments for 10 years, and this is whether you're a lawyer or just working in public interest, after 10 years of making payments, that loan is forgiven, or so I hear. I haven't gotten to the 10 years yet, but I think that's how it works. So I'm just kind of writing on that, hoping that my debt is gonna go away at some point. But I mean, I love doing what I do, and I wouldn't change it because I would be scared of the debt. I think that was my choice, and maybe it's different for everyone. But I love my job, and I feel like the debt will get paid, even if it's years and years and years. But somehow it'll get paid. So that's my experience. I hope I answered all your questions.
Well, you've asked the critically important question, I think, for anybody contemplating going to law school these days, because tuition is absolutely out of hand, and it's going to keep going up just because that's the way that side of the legal market works. The problem is the other side of the legal market, that is, those who hire, are restructuring themselves. So it's not going to be guaranteed that people walk out the door of a very good law school and suddenly going to be paid $160,000 a year, as they have been for the last several years in a LaSalle Street firm. More and more firms are experimenting with lower pay, with requirements for almost an apprenticeship to go along the way. So if you think, oh, look, I want to practice in a big firm, I want to make lots of money, go wherever you want to go. Because you'll be able to take care of your debt. But if you want to work for the government or you want to go into public interest, take the financing question very seriously. You've just heard some great tips from somebody who's living it. Because you might be better off, if you know that you don't want to practice in a big firm, of going to a place of lesser prestige that just gives you a lot more money. So you'll still get a good legal education. There are no two ways about that. But the last thing you want to do is spend bundles and bundles of money in terms of debt and go to a law school and then struggle to find a job in a restructuring market. So my bottom line on this, some of you have heard, is don't go to law school right away. Take a year, take 2, take 3. You'll be a more attractive candidate to many law schools. And at the same time, the market might settle down and the economy might stop being a down economy. So it's just really important to think about.
And I actually would like to speak this too. I'm from a pretty low income background. I did not have any parental support, and I'm pursuing government work now. I learned the hard way from the law school application process that pretty much only the top 3 schools offer actually need-based aid. But if you can get into one of those, I basically didn't pay tuition for Stanford. That was a good deal. I still have a huge amount of debt because you're paying your living expenses in expensive cities, but that was a great deal. Lower than that, there's aid available, but it's really tied to merit and largely your LSAT score. However, I would also say that a lot of the higher ranked schools have, well, the government program's great and it's awesome that they offer that now. A lot of the high-ranked schools have their own loan repayment programs. Through Stanford, they pay, I'm working for the government, and I think I make pay is all relative. Money is very relative. As my first year, I graduated 6 months ago, I'm making what my father makes after 30 years as a public school teacher. That's kind of awful, but also kind of like, woohoo, I have lots of money. So it sort of depends what you want to be doing. For me, I find the government salary to be very generous. I can live easily on it. I have a different standard of living than other people do. But, for me, I'm making the high 60s, and Stanford pays 70% of that. And forgives it every year. If I was making less, if I was making in the 40s or 50s, they'd be paying all of my loans off. And that's a pretty good deal. So really don't believe the sticker price.
Right.
Look into what merit aid, what need-based aid, what repayment plans are available, because that can really change the price for people.
The very top schools, the top 3 or 4 law schools have got into competition for the best loan forgiveness program for people working in the public sector, which they now broadly define to include judicial clerks, as a matter of fact.
Depending on the school.
It depends. That's what I'm saying. It's Yale, Chicago, certainly gone in that direction.
Before we ask the next question, we were requested that we use the microphone so that it will be included on the recording. So we can either do that or have you repeat each of the questions.
I'd rather repeat it because otherwise people are going to be climbing over each other and we're wasting time. So, sir.
Hi, my question is particularly to Mr. Castaneda. So I'm mostly interested in international and public interest law, but like you, I'm planning on taking a few years off and doing paralegal work. So I was wondering whether, would the experience gained from a paralegal position, regardless of what type of law that specifies in, transfer well to other areas of law, or should I look specifically for paralegal positions within, say, the public interest field or other areas?
The question is, what's the utility of paralegal experience, particularly for someone who wishes to go into public interest law?
The utility is very high. To answer your question directly, really was yes. It really, in my opinion, it doesn't matter what area of law your paralegal position is in, because the idea is you're working with lawyers. The commonality there is you're dealing with legal issues and analysis and a thought process that goes across all areas, really. After that, I mean, if you had to choose between the two, if you had an opportunity, obviously, to work as a paralegal for a public interest law firm, obviously, but I would not turn down a good opportunity. I was a paralegal for 3 years with 2 different law firms. The first year was at Jenner and Block. That was commercial litigation. The second 2 years was with a firm in Los Angeles called Mitchell, Silberberg, and Knupp. They were an entertainment law firm, or they still are, I should say. And really, none of those have anything to do with child protection law in Cook County, Illinois. But I will say that everything that I learned in those 3 years, I apply every day in some fashion.
Good, thanks. Yes, sir.
Okay, this question, I guess you could say, it's open to the entire panel, because whoever feels they can answer it, but this may sound vague. From a legal perspective, why is it that most people who are involved in politics in some way either start out as lawyers or have law degrees, and like where do those two fields, like law and politics, intersect?
The question is, what's the intersection between legal training, practicing law, and politics, since so many of our politicians seem to be current or former lawyers? I'm not sure this panel has the expertise to provide a nuanced analysis to that question, but you said it's for the whole panel, so anyone want to take a crack at that?
I might just say ego, but I mean,
May I chime in?
Of course.
I'm sorry, were you finished? Certainly that's a factor, but public policy considerations, I think should, if not do, blend in with a career in politics. Legislation, right? Is this piece of legislation, does it have a chilling effect on good public policy? Yes, no? Should it be modified? These are the issues that come up in law, because you're really looking at public policy. There's a lot of public policy issues embedded in your law school courses. It's a little, it's hard to see sometimes because a lot of the law school courses are really business school courses. They're really courses designed to help, help you make your contracts better. But in all of these contracts, you've got public policy issues. That would be my answer.
I'd say, I think there are 2 elements, too, that's not inconsistent with what John just said. One is, it has been a penchant of the body politic in this country for the last 50 years to, having identified a social problem, legislating against it, on it, or regulating it. So, the whole idea of the formation of, as John says, of public policy, politicians, is very tied up in legislation. Second point is the form of what politicians and lawyers do is very similar. It's rhetorical. You convince people in politics by the arguments that you make and the images that you project. You convince people in court, whether they're juries or judges, by the formulation of the arguments that you make. So they're very allied in terms both of their subject matter and of the form of discourse they employ. Which is not to say it's a good thing. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lexi Bolton. This is open to the whole panel. So for someone who's considering a job, maybe not as a lawyer per se, but who wants to learn the skills that law school might teach you, like what are some of those skills you think that even for someone not looking to be a lawyer, law school would be really helpful, like logic or rhetoric or any of those kinds of things?
Okay, the question is from someone who's not sure that she wants to be a lawyer and may in fact not want to be a lawyer. Are there certain skills that law schools teach particularly well that would make 3 years and $125,000 worth of debt justified?
conservatively.
Conservatively, yeah, exactly right. And open to the whole panel. Next question. No, sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
The core of a huge aspect of going to law school is, well, number one, you really learn business. from a legal perspective. The whole process of a legal education, which you may have heard involves a lot in your first year as part of the Socratic method, is you're learning a way of thinking that I think serves you well in any business context or any other context. The one thing, though, about law school, at least in my experience, I went to Tulane down in New Orleans, is very few courses are actually what I would consider practical in terms of nuts and bolts, okay? I mean, there's a trial ad course where you learn the basics of trial advocacy, but I don't know if anybody saw this, but about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, there was actually an article in the front page of the New York Times talking about how law firms, actually, some law firms now actually are setting up practical courses to teach there's some of their lawyers the practical nuts and bolts of, say, the corporate world and how to do corporate law and stuff like that. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I would say that the one thing about law school is it does teach you a particular analysis, a way of thinking that is easily translated into the business community as well as just being a lawyer. And I frankly know a lot of lawyers that people, in fact, that I went to law school with at Tulane, that got out of law school and just decided not to practice law. They went into business, and it served them well. Mitt Romney actually went to law school. At the same time he went to Harvard Business School, he was in Harvard Law School.
Which way does that cut?
I'm not sure. Okay. But I mean, you do learn a method of analysis that I think serves you well in a variety of areas. But I don't know, from my perspective, if you really don't think you're interested in practicing law or don't have a clue what the practice of law is, I do agree with a comment to take a couple years off out of college. I found that by the time I got to law school, after working for 2 years on my own, and when I say on my own, when I graduated from college, my dad gave me $100 and thought that was a big gift. And that was the last money I ever received from my parents. You learn a lot when you're just on your own working, especially if you can land a job that gives you a certain amount of, or a high degree of responsibility. And those jobs are out there. They really are. As a matter of fact,
On your initial point, let me say, one of my former students was interviewing for a clerkship at the Supreme Court several years ago. And the justice in question asked her, well, did law school teach you how to think? She said, no, college did. He said, where did you go? The University of Chicago. If you survive Hume and Soch cores, you get the guts of what learning to think like a lawyer is all about, which is nothing but precision. Not ignoring premises, being consistent, logical development, all that sort of thing. I think going to law school is much too high a price to pay for someone who's just trying to improve forensic skills. I think it may have utility, and it seems to be proven, for someone who wants to go into business. We find, and this was a topic of discussion at lunch today, that as our graduates get older, that they're out for 10 years, 15 years, or something like that, more and more of them are not practicing law in the private sector, that they're in business or doing something else.
And I would say, too, I mean, I don't think this is a reason you should go to law school, but for some of my friends who, through law school, figured out that they really didn't want to be doing that, or they wanted to go into, got involved with the business school and so on, you get really close with the people you go to law school with.
Yeah.
And that is a network of people who are going to be high achievers, doing well, and those contacts can be extremely valuable. I mean, I know people who graduated and are setting up a catering company now. Should not have gone to law school to set up a catering company, but since they did that, they do have a lot of potential clients who know them well and want to help them out. But that's more of a salvaging it rather than something you should plan on.
No, I think that's a very good point. Another question. Yes.
My name is Puspa. I'm in the college. And my question is for why did you decide to go straight?
Question is, why did you decide to go straight through?
Why? I think, okay, to be perfectly honest, I think I just figured it was the easiest thing to do after college. I didn't want to struggle with trying to look for a job. But I think that was that, and of course, I think I was pretty determined that I wanted to be in public interest law in some sort of capacity. And I didn't know what I was going to do with my time in the meantime. And so I just took the LSAT, applied, got accepted, and I just figured, okay, might as well do it now. That and the other, personally, this is just a personal thing. I think I would have been one of those people that if I had let go of school for a period of time, it would have been really hard for me to go back because I would have been distracted with other things in life. But that is my personal choice. I now looking back, I think I would have followed the advice of taking some time off, maybe being a paralegal, doing something else. But that's what I did.
Good, thanks. Way in the back.
My question is for the whole panel. Do you use your bachelor's degree in your everyday work, and if so, how?
The question for the whole panel is, do you use your bachelor's degree, whether globally or your concentration, in your legal practice?
In some real way, although it is small, yes, and I'll tell you why. I ended up with a degree in economics. So frequently, I think in terms of incentives, I think in terms of maximizing utility. I really do. And I think in terms of balancing different interests. Those and concepts similar to that come up, I think, more easily in part because of my economics history back at the University of Chicago.
For me, I guess I did international studies and Latin American studies in the U of C, so kind of international law, human rights law, immigration law kind of goes hand in hand. And just as everyone has been saying, I think the U of C really teaches you how to think and how to challenge, and that is something that you do every day as a lawyer.
Yeah, I graduated with a BA in history, and the one thing I learned in going through that program is the need to take a huge amount of facts and trying to make a coherent story out of it, which is what, to me, history is all about. And to me, that's what trial work's like. It's taking a huge amount of information and trying to turn it into a story that is compelling and makes sense, and the analysis of the facts. But I think that the comment that's been made a couple of times now about the value of the U of C education and what you really get out of the Common Core is probably the one thing that's helped me the most as a lawyer. It helped me the most in law school, and it helps me the most in terms of my day-to-day practice.
I was a visual art major, and so I shouldn't say it helps, but it helps immensely, actually. Because with the visual art degree here, you're switching a lot between, because it's UChicago, we can't have it be, just pretty things. You're doing a lot of very critical thinking about visual things, and then switching that off to switch over to doing creative work. And I find that being able to switch that your way of looking at the things and being able to come up with creative problem solving are hugely valuable skills as a lawyer. You also, we had very brutal critique system in the art department.
Yeah.
And again, once you can face up to someone with decades of experience, who obviously gets to have more say than you, and defend yourself and really push for this thing you believe in that you don't really have a lot of evidence to support, again, that's hugely helpful in law.
That's good. Good point. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Luke. I was going to ask, how important is networking and making personal connections inside the law field?
The question, I take it for the whole panel, is how important is networking and making connections inside the whole law field? Everyone on the panel would say it's very important, I would think. Yes, ma'am.
Well, that was good.
My name is Tiffany Taylor. Thank you for being here today. My question is for Professor Hutchison. What advice do you have for students wanting to become a law school professor?
Reconsider your ambition first. And the reason I say that is that particular market is contracting. The cost of legal education has gotten so high, it's under such intense scrutiny in various quarters, that there are not new lines being added. And as people retire, those lines aren't being filled. So it's going to be a terribly tough road. If you think, though, that this is what you want to do, you need to go to a top law school. That means at least a top 10 law school, puts their 13 or 14. You need to do extremely well academically. You probably should have a federal clerkship, preferably with a Court of Appeals judge. And you should have a demonstrable research agenda and show that you're going to be a prolific writer. Indeed, it used to be that the sine qua non to a law school teaching job in the United States was the Supreme Court clerkship. Within the last 10 years, that has totally changed for a couple of reasons. One, the bonuses that Supreme Court law clerks get paid by private firms, but also the fact that just being a Supreme Court law clerk doesn't mean that you're going to be a prolific scholar. And scholarship publication is the currency in American legal education and, frankly, in American higher education. So consider it carefully. This is almost like the first Star Wars, where, Luke has to shoot it into a very small hole, and the Force may not help you, even if it's with you. But come by and see me sometime, and we can talk in more detail about it. My office in the law school is room 411. Okay? Yes?
I'm Alita. Hi, thank you all for being here. I just wanted to know if the rumors about being a lawyer are true in terms of the hours that you work, and if those hours change depending on whether you work in the private or public sector.
The question is workload, hours that lawyers work. Is it difference in the public sector, private sector, the like?
I work 40 hours a week, but I work for the federal government. That is unheard of anywhere else. My friends who are clerks, I'm hoping to see them this weekend, but they're all working this weekend. I didn't even bother to call the friends who are working at law firms.
I think that the real basic answer is it really depends. And it depends on a huge number of factors. If you're in the United States Attorney's Office in Chicago, you're probably working 15-hour days, okay? At least if you're in the criminal division, okay? If you're in a Illinois State's Attorney's Office doing criminal work, it's probably not as bad, but you're working long hours. If you're working for Jenner and Block as a second-year associate, 60 hours a week, okay? If you're working for a mid-sized firm, it's not so bad, okay? I own my own firm, okay? So I'm putting in 60 hours or more, but it's because I'm splitting my time between the practice of law, the administrative aspects of the practice, and marketing, okay? It really just does depend. And as a lawyer, when you're graduating from law school, you actually have a tremendous amount of control of that issue depending on what type of law you want to practice and what type of lifestyle you want your first 3 or 4 years out of practice. And also really depends in part on where you want to practice. I mean, I started my first 2 years in Denver, Colorado, with a mid-sized firm in the mid-1980s. And our billable rate, meaning the number of hours that I was required to work, that where the time was billed to the client, was about 1,400 to 1,500 hours a year. And that was considered high in Denver. I came to Chicago 2.5 years later, and the average billable rate for the same size of firm in Chicago was 1,800 hours. So it just depends on a lot of things. That where you want to practice, what type of law you want to practice, the firm you're practicing with, whether it's private or, but just because it's a public sector doesn't mean you're going to get 35 or 40 hours, because there are a lot of high-level, high-pressure public sector jobs where you're going to be putting in the time.
My friends, in fact, working the longest hours are the ones doing direct services to very poor clients, because there is always someone else who desperately needs their help. They're there, and they really care about what they're doing, but it means they're there all the time. And when they're not doing the legal work, they're raising money for the program.
And if I may just chime in, going to law school, that's a profession, all right? It's not a 9-to-5 job where you punch in a time clock. Even in the public sector, if there's a stereotype there, that's misplaced, because obviously you're a lawyer to be a zealous advocate for your client. If you know you need to put in all the time you need to make sure that your client's interests are taken care of, then you're going to do it, whether you're in the public sector or not.
My daughter works for a federal district judge who has a very high caseload. She says she's working between 60 and 70 hours a week for less money than Anna's getting right now.
Yeah.
But let's clarify one thing, okay? A lot of major law firms, a lot of law firms in the city of Chicago and nationwide have over the years recognized the fact that since 45 to 50% of the law school graduates are women, that at one point or another may want to start families. There are a number of law firms that have very reasonable, creative ways of bringing in talented women and making accommodations so that they can have a family and have a balanced life. And I know attorneys, for instance, at Sun and Shine and other of the major law firms where these law firms are very progressive and they figured out a way to make it work. So don't listen to us and think, oh my God, I'm going to go to law school and then I've got to work 90 hours a week or 80 hours a week and I'm not going to have a life and I'm not going to have a husband or I'm not going to have a wife for that matter, because you know, it's like anything. You've got to approach it sensibly and really be clear about what you want as a lawyer and what type of career you want to have. Because you can have a very meaningful career and still have a family. I mean, getting a JD doesn't mean you sacrifice everything.
There's another question over here. Didn't you have one?
I'm Caitlin Rudin. I'm a current second year in the college, and I have a big question for all the panelists. What is the single most important piece of advice you would give to us as current second and third years in the college regarding the law school application process?
Single most important piece of advice that each person on the panel can give with respect to the law school application process.
I guess I would say, well, single. I would say if you know you want a top law school, then that's your route. Apply early admission. That would be my piece of advice.
My piece of advice, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to refer you to a resource that will give you lots of advice. Top Law Schools, it's an online web forum. It is moderated, so it's not the completely crazy people, but it is filled with a lot of people who have very strong opinions, who will be brutally honest with you, but who can give you the information you need to tailor your applications well. They'll edit essays or resumes middle of the night. You can email it to some kid and who has gotten obsessed with the process, and they'll give you really good advice. So I strongly recommend you check that out. You can also get very honest reviews from students who are currently at these schools about what it's like, how they feel about it. I'd really recommend checking it out. And I only found it once I'd already applied, so I didn't get to use those things. But when you're hearing back from schools, it takes a long time. And this is the one community of people who really wants to hear about every wait list. I'm waiting on this. When is Georgetown sending stuff? Because no one else in your life wants to hear that. They will be so sick of the whole process about a month in. Debbie will also. She's also super great.
Two pieces of advice. One is take the LSATs very seriously, because they are extremely important to most law schools. And secondly, and this is actually a pre-application thought, give some real thought as to where you want to go to, if you were to be a practicing lawyer, where you would want to practice, and to the extent you can think about it, what type of law you would want to practice. Because depending on where you want to live, you might be better off applying to a local law school. To give you a great example, if you want to live in the New Orleans area, you're just as well going to Tulane and doing well there as opposed to Harvard, because if you look at the number of top lawyers in that city, they're virtually all from Tulane. And the same is true, say, in Denver. You may be better off going to the University of Colorado, especially if you're a Colorado resident. So give some thought as to where you want to live and what are the local law schools there. Don't just automatically select Harvard, Chicago, Yale, et cetera. They're all great schools. And secondly, give some thought in terms of what type of lawyer you think you may want to be. Because if your passion, for instance, is environmental law, then there are certain schools that have, Tulane actually is one of them, that have extremely good environmental law programs where you may want just to consider going to one of those schools. Or like my colleague here who decided deliberately to go to DePaul because of the nature of the program that they had there.
I would just add, seriously consider working for a couple of years before you apply.
Yes.
All the other, and I also adopt, by incorporation, all of the other advice. It's all very good advice.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name is Erin.
You didn't say anything.
My question is primarily aimed to Mark, but anyone else who would want to contribute. What do you think on the nuanced idea, if you're interested in more corporate law, of doing like a joint MBA and law degree? Do you have colleagues that have done that, or positives and negatives you think on the subject?
Well, I almost got divorced, or didn't marry my fiancée because she went to business school, so that will give you an idea. Actually, I think it's a waste of time, but that's a personal bias against business schools. For one thing, you learn a lot about business law and business in law school. The only thing you may not learn directly is accounting and certain aspects of finance. And most universities in the country, if you're in law school, they will probably let you take selected classes in business school. Now, there are probably certain types of professional areas where, especially if you're interested in, say, at some point, not only going to law, but maybe getting into consulting, the joint ticket would probably be good. If you want to work for McKinsey and Company, they're not going to hire you if you just have a JD, but if you have a JD MBA, a company like that would look at you differently. But, in terms of the business, I think you could go to law school and take selected courses at the business school, learn just what you need to know and save a lot of money and get out of school sooner.
That seems to be the conventional wisdom, where I work and talking to people on the law school faculty. There has been more of an effort by the better schools in the last several years to integrate business school type courses above and beyond accounting to finance and that sort of thing. And boy, saving a year and another 60 grand, unless, as Jim says, you really think, well, I want Boston Consulting or McKinsey to be an option. That's about the only place where I can see value added.
I want to disagree a little bit. I know a lot of people who did joint business, and JD Stanford's really pushes the interdisciplinary, and I think they could do both in 3 years, which is a good deal.
That's a great program.
Yeah, it's a great program. And for them, you don't learn anything in business school. As much as you don't learn anything in law school in some respects about the job you'll be doing, you really don't learn anything in business school. I took some classes, it's a joke. But you make hugely valuable connections, and I know the people who did both ended up, especially if they want to go into high-tech sector, having both is very valuable. So it depends on the program, it depends on the cost, and what you want to do with it.
Right. One or two more questions, or is that all right? Yes.
So I got interested in law largely through mock trial and moot court type stuff. Very much the sort of the thrill of the performative, rhetorical part of it. But you were saying at the beginning that was part of what you loved about it.
What's that now?
You were saying that was part of what you loved about being a lawyer. But I don't sort of naturally have much interest in business. So what do you find interesting about that kind of commercial litigation that combines with
The question, which I'm obliged to repeat, is that for someone whose interest in the law is the rhetorical and the performative, and who has very little interest in business, commercial transactions, and that sort of thing, why are you doing what you're doing, Jim?
Okay. I like business litigation because it's problem solving, okay? Problem solving with a human face, okay? Most of the companies that I work with are what I would call mid-sized companies, where I know personally the president or his staff, and I enjoy that interaction. And I enjoy being in front of a jury where I'm explaining the problem and I'm explaining a solution and I'm trying to persuade them that the solution I'm proposing is legally the solution that they should arrive at. I hate accounting, okay? And so when I have a case that's like really numbers crunching, I usually bring in somebody to help me, either one of my partners or I hire an accounting expert because it's way over my head. I mean, a checkbook is about as good as I get. But but to me, what I like about commercial litigation more than anything else, and being in court and trying a case, is figuring out the problem, which oftentimes can be anything from, fraud to unfair competition. It's not all just a case about damages and money. But I like taking all that information, figuring it out, because for me, given my practice, every case is different, okay? And so I'm dealing with, in each case, a unique fact pattern, and so it's figuring it out, working closely with my clients, and then structuring the trial and getting in front of the judge or the jury and trying to persuade. Because to me, the high point for me of being a lawyer is that act of the art of persuasion. And every time I get into court, and whether I'm in front of a judge just arguing a motion, or whether I'm in front of putting on a witness, I get a real rush out of it. And I feel extremely lucky that I get to go into court and have fun. Don't get me wrong, it's a ton of work. I would say for every hour I'm in court on an evidentiary hearing, that's backed up for about 4 hours of work on the back end. It's a lot of work, but it's just extremely rewarding. I hope I'm answering your question, because
And I'm going to chime in and just say, I think this is a resource that people just don't go. Most courts are open to the public. If you really want to see a trial, just go and view it. I think for me anyway, as a young attorney, before I went to my first hearing, before I had a trial, I just went and observed, because I wanted to know whether I could do it, whether it was really as hard as sometimes it seems when you've never done it. So I would say, if you really want to see it just in action, just go. Sometimes you might think that it's glamorous, and it's not that glamorous, but maybe it's an interesting case, and you will find it beneficial seeing it.
I just want to chime in and say that we are hosting a trek to the Loop, and last year we did go sit in on some hearings, and this year we hope to as well.
Okay.
Can I just kick in one point? Sure. that most of what you do as a lawyer, though, will not, even if you have a job that has a lot of trial work, that's a very small part of what you do. It's the part that makes it on TV and so on, but many people have very successful careers, will never be in a courtroom. And what you really, a good determiner of whether you'll like law or not, do you like reading and writing a lot? Because you are going to spend 95% of your time reading complex things and putting complex ideas into words.
Under time pressure.
Yes.
One more question. Yes, sir.
When it comes to applying to law school, specifically the University of Chicago, is the coming from the college, I know officially there's no stance that it's a feeder school, but there tends to be more of a UChicago undergraduate population in the law school. Is that taken into consideration when looking over applications for the law school at the university, and furthermore, like at other universities?
Well, certainly, we want to have as many good students from the college in the law school as we can. This was a topic of conversation at lunch. Year in and year out for the last 4 or 5 years, it's been 15, 17, 16, 18, something along those lines, and we certainly want to have a very strong presence. But we don't want to turn into what Yale was 25 years ago, where half the student body, was just moving across the street. So, it's a balance in terms of there are multiple diversities in life. But a strong record at the University of Chicago, you don't have to pass a special bar to get into the University of Chicago Law School. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. Let's thank the panel. Thank you.